have to do the budget today. We can wait till next one. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everybody ready? All right, without objection, we will resume the regular order of business. Madam County Attorney, any items from executive session?
Yes, Chairman Pitts. Is there a motion to approve the request for representation set forth in item number 2 of the executive session agenda?
All right, motion to approve by Commissioner Abdul-Rahman, seconded by Commissioner Ellis. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 6 yeas, 0 nays.
Any other items?
Are you done, Ms. Attorney? All right, thank you. Yes, I move that we approve the amended resignation letter of Richard Barron of December 17th, 2021, to be effective April 1st, 2022.
Is there a second? All right. Seconded by Commissioner Ellis. Commissioner Abdul-Rahman would like to be heard.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to go on record with the public that, you know, we just need to, as a body, I think sometimes the communication needs to be a little bit better as a body. And I want to go on record for the public to know that the communication as elected officials needs to be better in order for us to make informed decisions. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, Commissioners? All right, I would just like to say that we are making this motion at the request of the Board of Registrations and Elections. Any other comments?
Yeah. So, I made public statements about this situation for some time now. I've probably been probably more involved in this than I should have. I spent a lot of time, and elections is complicated. And what's before us is a resignation of Richard Barron effective April 1. And that in large part is contingent upon, not contingent upon, but for an effective elections going forward. The hope is, the expectation is that we would have his replacement, permanent replacement, in place by that time. And it's been my experience with search firms that that's an almost impossible task. That, on top of the fact that the primary elections this year are May 24th. So if this person, his replacement, Barron's replacement, is not in place by April the 1st, then we could have a problem. And I'm looking for another, and I want to emphasize this, another smooth election in Fulton County. Elections in Fulton County this year are going to be watched by every soul in this country because of the Senate race, and the governor's race in particular, all in preparation, in my opinion, for 2024. That's why I think we need to be as careful and as cautious as we possibly can. And it's also, we've heard again this morning from a group of informed, concerned citizens talking about in detail at every meeting about the Happy Faces contract and / Richard Barron. The manager is prepared to make a report to us on elections at our next meeting, as well as the Happy Faces contract. And all of this is tied together. So I say all of that to say that I'm just really not comfortable in accepting this letter today. And the final act would be for this body to accept the actions of the Board of Registration and Elections. And I'm just not prepared to do that today. Vice Chair, Commissioner Hall, followed by Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad you mentioned the speakers from this morning from the community, because the speakers made it very clear that they were too also confused about what is going on with the Board of Registrations and Elections, the Department of Registrations and Elections director's position, and who had the authority to do what and who did what. And so I haven't heard anyone make it clear, so I just want to make it clear to our listening and watching audience that what you saw in the news about the 3-month extension of the director of the Department of Registrations and Elections was not done by this Board of Commissioners. It was done by a vote of 3-0 of the Board of Registrations and Elections. And now what is before us is the ratification of that new resignation from Richard Barron that now has an April 1st date. So that is, we are now addressing that issue. We did not start the issue. That recommendation came from the Board of Registrations and Elections, not the BOC. It is now before the BOC. Thank you.
Commissioner Ellis, followed by Vice Chair Houseman.
Just be brief on this subject. Board of Registrations of Elections, they met. This was their recommendation. They discussed their personnel matters in executive session. They came out, they made this recommendation. The director chose to acknowledge that. And unlike what we did earlier, last year, whenever that was, I would hope that we would respect the decision and will of this particular board and ratify the action which they have requested us to do, and move forward. I think it's important that we observe some protocol, respect the will of this board, and allow the decisions related to leadership to be accelerated and move forward. Thank you.
Vice Chair Houseman.
Yes, just a few more comments other than have already been made. The reason that we are having to take this action is because of some personnel regulations that require, apparently, that the Board of Commissioners officially accept the resignation of this individual, just as we were required to accept the previous decision or not. And that's what we're doing here now, just to follow Fulton County policies. This has been a situation that has gone on far too long, and we have spent a lot of time on it. And for the good of the department and at the request of the chair of the board to honor the letter, that's what we're doing today. And we're going to do everything we can to expedite and assist the board in getting a search firm in place, finding a suitable candidate. We have been assured that they can name an interim to assist during the transition. The chair seems very confident that they'll be able to handle it. And we will do everything we can to support them during this time of transition.
Commissioner Abdul-Rahman.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to belabor this point, but I do want the listening audience to know where this commissioner sits on this issue. I think we do a disservice when correct information is not relayed. And when the chair of the Board of Registration and Elections says she made the initial decision based on the understanding that she had at that time, that we would be expeditious in having a search firm, she made that decision based on that. There is no search firm in place today. So to me, and this is here again, everybody has their own lens, but we come to these meetings, we hear people say what they say about Happy Faces. We hear people say what they say about Richard Barron. But you want me to come here and make a decision on something that you just said to me, on incorrect information that you had to clear up with no search firm in place today. I will not support any action, and we have not put the search firm in place. If we can get the search firm in place by the next meeting, I'll be more than happy to support this. But I am extremely uncomfortable. And I know I'm new to this, or at least some of us think I'm new to this, but I know when communication is not being given in a timely or correct fashion. And as an elected official, if I have questions and concerns that I want to look over and check for myself, I should be given that opportunity. I will support this. I will not support this today. It was just put in front of me, and I would be more a proponent of this and in support of this if we already have a search firm in place for a new director of elections. Richard Barron needs to go. I'm the very first person, and it's not that he's not capable, but I think we get too much of a bruised eye. People keep saying there was fraud, and there was no fraud. And so we need a new elections director. I am on the page with that. But to do it in such a haphazardly fashion, you are not solving the problem. And so I want to be on record crystal clear as to why I object to this. And I object to this because there are questions, there are concerns. This was just handed to me, and we do not have a search firm in place. I want to be crystal clear to the listening audience that the things that we are accusing Richard Barron of doing it, this body is doing it itself. And other individuals are doing it, and it's trickling down to this body. And so, unfortunately, as it stands today, I cannot support this.
Commissioner Ellis?
Yeah, I just want to read this letter of resignation into the record that we are voting to ratify. I'm not going to offer any conjecture on said individual that's being discussed performance. That's not germane to the question. We have a resignation letter in hand. People resign from organizations all the time. Our personnel policy requires us to ratify this. The resignation letter reads as follows. December 17, 2021, Richard Barron, Fulton County Director of Registration and Elections. Dear Chairwoman Willard and the Fulton County Board of Registration and Elections. On November 3, 2021, I submitted my resignation to the Board of Registrations and Elections, effective December 31st, 2021. On December 17, 2021, the Board of Registrations and Elections voted 3-0 to request that I extend my effective date for resigning to April 1, 2022. In the interest of a smooth transition to a new director of this department, an interest in continuing public service to the Fulton County Board of Registrations and Elections, for directing operations to prepare for the May general primary election, and my commitment to provide stability and direction to the staff of Fulton County Department of Registrations and Elections, I'm rescinding my original registration date and extending it to be effective April 1, 2022. Sincerely, Richard Barron, CC Fulton County Chairman of the Board of Commissioners, Rob Pitts. This is what we are voting to ratify. I offer no opinion on anything else other than what is before us, and I understand that based on our personnel regs, it's our requirement to ratify ratify this particular resignation letter. Is that correct?
It's correct that our personnel policy requires resignations to be accepted by the appointing authority in writing.
And this would constitute that said approval and meet the requirement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question that I have at this point is, what happens if this doesn't get approved today? What happens with the resignation that has already been voted on by the Board of Registrations and Elections? What happens with the position of Director of the Department of Registrations and Elections? Madam County Attorney, can you speak to that?
I think because the personnel policy does not contemplate that a resignation submitted would not be accepted, it's unclear what would happen. At a minimum, the resignation would not be accepted. And there is an argument that it would be invalid because it is not accepted per the policy of Fulton County.
And Mr. Herman, can you provide any insight into what happens with the position, or, because that was the second part of the question?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. If the resignation is not accepted, I presume, based on the county attorney's guidance, that I guess Richard Barron could continue in that role, correct, Madam Attorney?
It is conceivable he could continue if
Okay.
he changed his intent from his stated date of resignation.
He
Because the resignation would not be effective at that point.
So the resignation would not be effective, and he could just continue to work in his capacity as director of the Department of Registrations and Elections for whatever length of time that he chooses to continue to work?
I mean, that he would not be precluded from doing that by virtue of the resignation until it becomes effective.
So is that a yes or a no, that he would just continue to work in his position of director of the
We can't
department?
speculate what he would do, but
If he
would not
so
be
choose to.
He would not be prevented by his resignation until it's effective.
Okay, gotcha, thank you. So one of the main problems I have is that the contract is not in place. And also, there's a question of a lapse between the April 1st date and the fact that we have an election in May, and what would actually be taking place, who would be in place, who could cover that length of time. And we do not want to put our elections in a bad situation with a gap that no one can address between April 1st and the May election. So I can't support it. We need a lot more information. We need closure on all this stuff. We shouldn't have any gaps in what is going to happen with our elections. We shouldn't be putting our elections in jeopardy like that.
Commissioner Ellis again?
Did want to follow up on sort of this line of questioning. If indeed this weren't ratified today, and then a person is deemed not to be resigned, can a contract be executed with a search firm to go find a replacement for someone who hasn't resigned?
And Commissioner, I would say at that point, no, because technically the position is not vacant anymore, or slated to be vacant. So I think we will be in a quandary.
I mean, we've all got our personal views on this. Some of us would have seen, wish this would happen several months ago. Some of us may wish that it not happen, but we have a resignation letter. The Board of Registrations and Elections has requested us to acknowledge that and to do everything in our power to help them accelerate moving forward with the search to find a new director. This is the process as prescribed by our rules. I'm putting a lot of my own personal feelings aside about what I'm interjecting into this conversation. And I would hope that the rest of us do as well and act on what's before us. I mean, it's the proper protocol and the proper policy to allow us to move forward with a transition of leadership. We don't, we put ourselves, we talked about at risk, we put ourselves further at risk by not acting upon this today.
Commissioner Abdul Rahman?
Thank you, Chair. My question to the county attorney is this. This being held and done at the next session, does that bar us from not ratifying the contract? I mean, the acceptance of the resignation?
So your question is if the acceptance of the resignation is held until the next recess meeting,
Yes,
would you be prevented from considering it at the next meeting?
yes.
Presuming that the amendment were not rescinded by the employee, you could consider it at the recess meeting.
So let me make sure that you and I are on the same page. What I need to know today, if this were to be held and we came back at the recess meeting, we could vote to ratify this resignation. Nothing precludes us from not doing that.
Presuming it is still the recommendation.
Other than if he, okay.
All things
So-
being equal, you could vote to accept the resignation at the next meeting of the board.
Okay, my next question, County Attorney, is this. If we vote today and this fails, is it done? If we do not ratify it today, what happens?
It can be brought back at the next meeting for consideration.
Thank you, that's what I needed, thank you.
Commissioner Morris,
Mr. Chairman, I move to call the question.
is there a second? All right, I'll second. Let's vote on calling the question. Madam Clerk? Correct. This is on the calling the question.
The motion to call the question passes, 4 yeas, 1 nay.
All right, now back to the main motion, which was to approve by Commissioner Hausman, seconded by Commissioner Ellis. Let's vote, please.
And the vote is open. And the motion fails, 3 yeas, 1 nay.
Next item.
Back on page 5, 22-0017, Finance, review and approval of the fiscal year 2022 final adopted budget and budget resolution.
All right, question, colleagues. This is the budget. Would you want to finish the budget today or finish everything else and take up the budget at the next meeting? We have until
So
one more
take it
meeting.
today.
What's your pleasure? Today?
My preference would be to take it up today.
Okay. You saying what?
Next meeting, that's my,
I would say we could discuss it. I don't know that we can take any action today with not having a
Okay, well,
full
we can
body here.
discuss it. All right, well, Mr. Manager, Madam CFO,
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Mr.
point of
Chairman.
order.
I'm sorry.
Just a
Commissioner
point
Ellis
of
has
order.
a
I mean,
question.
if we are not prepared to take action on this today, my preference would be that we take action on the items that we need to, and then discuss it at the end. I mean, I'd rather have it as understanding as a body as we're going into this. Are we going to take action on this today, or is this just going to be a discussion?
We got 3 discussions down here,
Discussion.
so.
I have some questions on a few things.
Well, I mean, I'd move we amend the agenda
All
such
right,
that,
let's
so
do
we
this.
take care of the
Let's see
action
what-
items.
Let's proceed as it's printed and see what happens.
All right.
All right, opening remarks. The budget presented by the CFO and the manager was based upon 3 things: a 9.33 millage rate, a 16.76 fund balance percentage, and a 96% collection rate. That yielded a certain amount of revenue, and the budget that they presented was based upon that revenue, that number. A couple of meetings ago, I'd asked for any enhancements that were going to be brought forward by commissioners, that if you had an enhancement, you identify its cost as well as a source of funding. And we talked about that. I proposed 2. I still have two. First one would be that 7% cost of living that that then Vice Chair Hall and I proposed at 7% COLA, and that would be funded out of the 24, 25, or 26 million that was already set aside for employees. Is that doable, Madam CFO or Mr. Manager?
Do you want to answer it? Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Chairman, in the document that we've prepared and presented to the board, we did include sufficient funding to cover that 7% COLA.
Okay. The second item was we have a very needed, long-needed department within DREAM called, I'm not sure what the exact name is, but it's sustainability. All of our clean air, all of that. One person, no staff, no nothing, not even supplies, and I've recommended that we fund that to the tune of $550,000. Since that department is within DREAM, that $550,000 would come out of a line item in DREAM, which I believe you've identified as well. Is that correct? Close to being correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think our approach would be to look at the sustainability projects that have been presented by DREAM, many of which include some cost offsets elsewhere in the budget, and that we would plan to fund sustainability items out of those savings, if you will. So we really haven't identified a specific line item for it, but we do think that we have a way in which to achieve what you're looking to do.
Okay. Thank you. That's acceptable. Commissioner Morris?
Couple of questions. First of all, we were assuming, as the chairman indicated, a 96% collection rate this year, and we ended up 1% short of that, if I understood your materials, the new materials.
Yes, sir.
And so what that's doing is throwing a little more revenue into 2022 as a result, assuming that 1% gets collected. Is there any, I guess the bills went out on a timely basis. I'm not sure why we ended up a little short. Is there any prospect of some collectability issues given COVID's impact on property values and homeowners who might not be able to pay? And I know the tax commissioner can sell the tax liens and so on and collect it ultimately. But is there any doubt about that, or do we know why we ended up a little short?
We've not had the opportunity yet to have a conversation with the tax commissioner himself on that issue, but he has not given any indication otherwise that he believes there's a collectability issue for the remainder of the digest. Typically, he collects about 99, percent of whatever gets billed. It may take a little bit of time for it, to ultimately all come in, but typically his collection rate is in the 99 percentile.
Right, and that's why I was just wondering why we ended up shy and whether there was some problem with some people just not being able to pay their bill and whether that might cause a collectability problem down the road. Again, with the understanding that he can sell the tax lien and ultimately get it. But the answer is you really haven't had that discussion with him to know. I guess my second question is, as I understand your revised proposed budget, it's like you've set aside $7.5 million for all of my colleagues' wish lists that we talked about, with the idea that we might be doing them this year, now in this year, 2022, and maybe deciding on a case-by-case basis mid-year or otherwise during this year. Is that the concept? We sort of set aside this pot of money with the idea we're going to make these decisions one at a time down the road?
Yes, sir. Given the what we're seeing currently with the Omicron variant, the increased need for testing, and quite honestly, the fact that we did not fully fund what the Board of Registration and Elections requested for the election budget this year. We felt like if we have this reserve of funds available, it could be used to address either of those two issues. And if we don't need it for that, then as we get into mid-year, it and any other resources that might be available from other underruns that we would not need to pledge towards either of those other issues could then be used to fund some of the items that have been addressed by the board.
Like my pet project, and that is a reduction in the millage rate.
That could be one item as well. Yes, sir.
I don't know that I'll ever get 4 votes for that. Okay, I understand. I understand the proposal. Thank you.
Vice Chair Houseman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we sat down, there was a copy of the PowerPoint at our desk, and then another one was handed out. Are there any differences between the two?
There should not be.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure I was looking at the right one.
Commissioner, I didn't know.
Let me ask you just a process question. Would you like to have the material presented? Because it answers some of these questions that are
It might be
coming up.
helpful, yes.
Right. So
Thank
if
you
we
for
could,
that.
Mr. Chairman, we are prepared to present the PowerPoint that was handed out.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, next slide, please. Members of the board, I think the first thing that we wanted to do in the presentation is to just sort of level set for our 2021 actual results. This slide shows you that as part of our mid-year projection and what was presented to you in the proposed budget for 2022, we were expecting to end 2021 with $736 million in revenues, $720 million in expenditures, and an ending fund balance of $243 million. We did perform a little better than expected, and we ended with $750 million in revenue, $727 million in expenditures, and a $250 million fund balance. Next slide, please. The areas, specifically the areas that these changes were driven by, on the revenue side, we saw some increase in what we had originally projected in the commission on tax collections with the offset for the credit card fee waiver that we have in place. We ended up outperforming our projection by about $6.5 million. In addition to that, court and law enforcement revenues were slightly better than projected by $1.5 million, and our indirect cost recovery was also better by $1.5 million. And then there's a number of different categories where we saw revenues combined together that are about $3.5 million better. The flip side of that is we had some areas that didn't perform as well as expected, one of which being the current year property tax collection that we just talked about, where we came in about 95% versus 96%. So that means we collected less this year, but we have more to carry forward in prior year collections for next year. We also experienced a timing difference on our current year utility tax collections. This one is actually an improvement on what we had in our mid-year projection by about $4 million, and that too will carry forward into 2021. And then again, another lots of different revenue lines that we expected to collect in either in 2020 and did not, and collected them in 2021, greater than what we had originally included in the projection, but there's no impact of those revenues carried forward. An example of this, I think, is the animal control revenue that we received from all of the cities. There were some past due amounts that were paid over in 2021 that won't, of course, carry forward and have an effect on 2022. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side, we ended up spending about $7 million more than what we had originally projected in our mid-year projection. And that's mostly due to some capital transfers that we made at the end of the year.
You need to move the slide.
Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide, please. I wonder if the... Okay, thank you. On the expenditure side, we did have a few, about $7 million more in expenses than what we originally had projected. Those tie to some transfers that we made at the end of the year out of some of our justice system partners' requests for use of savings to fund some capital-related projects, as well as funding the upfront costs associated with the warehouse consolidation, those costs that are above the TI that's included in the warehouse lease agreement. Next slide. So moving into the 2022 revised proposed budget, the total proposed budget for all funds this year is $1,257.7 million. The largest portion of which, of course, is associated with the general fund at $857.2 million, followed by the airport fund at 7.6, the water revenue fund at 159.3 million, water renewal fund at 100.1 million, the Fulton Industrial District 28.2, our 911 emergency fund 8.6, the bond fund, general obligation bonds 15.6 million, our risk management fund 64.2 million, our special appropriation funds at 17 million. Next slide, please. As far as the changes that we've recommended that are included in the booklet that you were provided as well, it's on page 13 of the booklet for the general fund. We've tried to summarize these changes in a narrative form. On the revenues, we've asked for a total increase in revenue of 4.8 million. This is the result of needing to increase by about $3 million the commission collections and credit card fee waiver offset account. This is now based on a full year of activity in that particular revenue stream and sort of right-sizing it for what we saw happen in 2021. We also have a couple of items that are related to timing differences, one of which is the increase in current year property tax collections of $6 million that were expected to be collected in 2021 and were not, and so we're bringing those forward to 2022. and that is offset by a $4 million reduction in our current year public utility property tax collections because we collected more in 2021 than we expected against that billing. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side, we have a total of $12.2 million in expenditure recommendations. The first of which is a $31,000 adjustment to the District 6 budget. This was for an item that was originally requested as part of the budget process and was overlooked by the staff, so this was a staff correction. I believe that's the case with the second item as well, a $54,000 adjustment to the District 4 budget. At the last board meeting, I believe the board acted on a salary adjustment for the county auditor. This $40,000 is necessary, a necessary increase in his budget to address that particular action item. Next slide, please. We did include an additional $2.8 million in the general fund budget to be able to fully support the cost of living increase at 7% for all employees, as well as we make sure that within the non-agency budget, we have the $21,000 that was requested by the clerk's office for the Muni Code. And once we have fully resolved the funding level needed for that, we'll transfer those funds to the clerk's budget, in addition to what they already have to support Muni Code. We also then increased the non-agency budget by $7.5 million in what we had identified as an appropriated reserve that can be used for the purpose that was discussed with Commissioner Morris just a few minutes ago. And then lastly, we needed to use about $1.7 million to keep our fund balance reserve at the 16.67% balance. Next slide, please. This next slide simply explains our reasoning and rationale around the establishment of the $7.5 million reserve. And our recommendation is that we would hold those resources in reserve until we get to a mid-year point and we see what our needs are going to be for the continued pandemic response, as well as ensure that we have sufficiently funded the midterm elections. Next slide, please. And then this last slide simply shows you the numbers in a form where you can see how it all nets out, and shows that with all of the additional resources that were available, they have all been taken into consideration in the document that is before you. It is balanced. It does meet the fund balance reserve requirement for the general fund. Next slide, please. These next couple of slides are included to just sort of round out the changes that we needed to make in some other funds as well. In the Fulton Industrial District, we provided an additional $120,000 for the police department for some additional vehicles and corresponding equipment for the vehicles. And then we also needed to reduce the non-agency portion of the budget to reflect actual year-end results. There was an asset purchase that happened at the end of the year that we thought would not be closed until the beginning of 2022. So this is cleaning up that issue. And then in the risk fund, we also needed to adjust the expenditure budget downward by $2.3 million, which is the result of higher expenses in that fund through the end of the year as originally anticipated, as well as providing for an additional $224,000 for the county attorney's office to fund an additional attorney 3 and an admin coordinator. Next slide, please. And then this last slide, Commissioners, is simply the next step slide that we typically provide to show you all of the various actions that we've taken during the budget cycle and where we're at today. And so today, we are able to, if it's the board's desire, to adopt the budget because we've met all of the legal requirements for it. Otherwise, we are prepared for the adoption to happen on the second meeting on January 19th.
All right, Vice Chair?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so thank you for that presentation. That's very helpful. We had public comment today asking for detail on certain things. I'm sure you heard that. One being the Department of Registrations and Elections. Do you have a breakdown of what the increase would cover? And can you explain? I know that it was stated that in 2021, we only had, I believe the comment was 18 million. We all know that it was 40 or so million, 44 million, if I recall. And we've had the conversation about making sure that's clear on the website. I would say, honestly, I have not looked myself to make sure that's happened. I hope that's happened. But could someone just please speak to the process and the way that the budget is presented for the registrations and elections during a general election year?
Commissioner Hausman, the registration and elections actually submitted a request for closer to 42 million in resources. Or I think it was maybe 42 million of which was related to specifically to the election cycles, and an additional 5 or 6 million that was related to equipment requests. So what we did when we funded this budget is we essentially funded 3 out of the 4 election cycles that they requested. They requested for the primary, the primary in May, they requested 10.4 million. They also requested 9.1 for a runoff associated with that. For the general election in November, they requested 12.4 million and an additional 9.8 million for the general runoff associated, for the runoff that could be associated with the general election. So we funded 3 out of the 4 and made the decision that we would look to underruns in the budget through the first half of the year if we actually are required to fund that 4th election cycle. So that's the premise behind how we structured the funding that we included in the budget. As for the specific details of their ask, we do have their detailed requests that lay out the positions that they're requesting for each one of these cycles, the period of time that they're requesting for each position, all of the ancillary costs associated with each election cycle. So we do have their detailed budgets as well to support those requests.
And where would we access that information?
The detailed budgets are not yet, because in the financial system, we have it all sitting in contingency, so the detailed budgets are not yet available in a public form. We can certainly make that happen. Right now, they're in spreadsheet form.
I think it would be helpful for this body to have a clear, since we're getting so much questions about it, to know exactly what is in the budget request. And then has it been updated on the website of what we did in 2020 as far as the expenses related to the election?
Hakeem, do you know? Did we put, I know we prepared the response and sent that to the Board of Commissioners. I'm not certain, Commissioner Hausman, if it's been if it's been put on the website. If not, we can make that happen today.
Yeah, I just think, you know, we're never going to get past the questions unless we provide the information. And I know we're all ready to move forward. And so I think the way to do that is to just get the information out there.
We can get that uploaded today. I'll make sure that we work with Jessica to make that happen.
All right, and then I hope that we are looking at our expenses from the municipal elections, the turnout, the ratios of what we had for staffing versus the turnout, so that we are accurately projecting what we really need in staffing for this upcoming cycle. I know the district, the precincts I visited, a lot of times there's far more workers than there are voters because we have such a robust early voting system. So while, of course, we don't want anyone waiting in line longer than the law allows, which is an hour, I don't think we want anyone waiting 30 minutes to vote. I do think we have to make sure that, that we are using our limited resources. I mean, we've got 14 million in requests here, and you've offered 7.5. So I just think that, we need to be realistic about what we're allocating in every area, including elections. So I hope that the comments that were made about the requests for equipment versus what is required, and all of those factors are being looked at and considered as you make the recommendation for what is needed in that department, especially that department, because it does get so much attention. And then secondarily, I'm just curious to the body here, we've got this list. Mr. Chairman, what sort of process do you want to have to go through? We want to go through these line by line. I know you mentioned the two that you are proposing. I've got a few. Everybody's got a few. How do you want to go about talking about this?
Now, what I had suggested that we do is that we, if you have an enhancement, that you identify the cost as well as a source of funding. And
Okay. Well, I've got the
now,
mic,
but
so
if
I'm,
we're going to do that today, we're going to wait until, just go through everything today and make some final decisions at the next meeting, because two things, I sort of set the parameters, and when I did that initially a couple of weeks ago, there were no objections, meaning no millage rate increase. Millage rate 9.33, fund balance 16.67, 96% collection rate.
well, I support, but all three of those, well, the collection rate is a variable. We never really can know exactly how that's going to end up, but the other two. All right.
Let me add one other before you begin. That 7.4 that they have not found, but that is set aside for 7.5 for enhancements. We can, either chip away at that, but certainly not go beyond that. But I support what they're recommending, because there's so many uncertainties out there that.
Well, we always know we have overruns and underruns, and we always know that, budget is a guesstimate in a lot of respects. So, and as far as historically, there's a recommendation that's made, but it's up to us to decide exactly what recommendations to accept and what to modify or change. So I just would like, the one thing that is on my wish list for the library system has been identified, the funding source through the TAD. So I hope that is not included in the 7.5 million and that is already allocated.
Which number is that?
The $1 million, it's item number 2.
Number 2. That's the one you've been talking about, right?
It's the library books.
Right.
$1 million, and it's funded out of the TAD fund. And then the only other item I personally asked for is the 150 for the public art project, which hopefully there'd be room in the 7.4 to fund that one. But that being said, what I just requested as far as an analysis of the true needs in the Registration and Elections Department, I don't know if y'all have done that or not. So, to me, it's still a question if the number that's recommended is really, what's really needed, or if it's maybe a little more there. Just seems like with our, the way we operate with our early voting, it's so popular that on Election Day, I feel like that we could get by with a little less staffing on those days, which would save some money, and a little less equipment. There's never any lines anymore on election day. So I just would hope that we're really taking a hard look at that.
Well, remember, on elections, we reduced it by a fourth to start with. So from what they asked to what is in the budget, it's been reduced by 25%. So then the question is, can we operate over 3 cycles at, let's say, 75% of what their original estimate was? Then there's plenty of money for the fourth. If we cannot operate at that level, then that's another matter. But we've already taken an action, really in the spirit of what you're saying, in this budget submission.
Okay, well, I mean, I appreciate that, and I know you have extremely great skills at budgeting, all of y'all do. Without seeing it in writing, I'm at a loss at how to even respond to that. So that's why I was asking for the information. Again, I just think that any area where, you know, when we have way more needs than we have resources for, we need to make sure that what's allocated in each area is really truly what's needed. That's my only
And
point.
so I think we ought to provide the detailed budget for elections to each commissioner, and then which was originally requested, then the reduction, and you can take a look at the line item detail that we did.
And then I'm looking at all these things for seniors. I mean, they all look like things we should do. I'm kind of taking that out of context too, without knowing exactly what's already included. So some of these where there's a lot of requests, it seems like we should have a little more idea of what's happening in those departments so that we can make wise choices here with what we select to include or not include. So, I mean, I'm happy to sit down with Hakeem or whoever and, you know, talk about this in detail outside of this meeting. I don't know if anyone else wants to do that, but that would be helpful to me.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so first, let's look at the fiscal year 2022 revised proposed budget. And I believe, Vice Chair Hausman, this is what you were just speaking to, because you did point out that the library books were on here on line number 2 and a couple of other things. I want to speak to the fact that this particular spreadsheet is showing us the amounts of the requests that were made for enhancements through the BOC, and then which ones are actually included already in the fiscal year 2022 budget, which I'm so happy to see, Mr. Chair, the additional funding so that our employees can have that 7% cost of living adjustment. I'm happy to see that it's already it's been included in the fiscal year 2022 budget. And so I know our employees are jumping for joy that it's already in the budget that we will be approving hopefully at our next meeting. A couple other things, the district attorney's legal assistance, that she was trying to ensure that they were no longer the working poor by increasing their salaries and also by enhancing her staff levels to what she needed them to be. I'm glad to see that that amount is included in the FY 2022 budget. And then it goes on from there. The Muni Code that we had a discussion about for the clerk's office is also included already in the fiscal year 2022 budget. I'm glad to see that you've done that. And then my additional position in my office that needed to be created, and additional personnel in other commission district offices. Also, you have on here the things that are funded through other means, and one of those was what Vice Chair Hausman spoke on about the library ebooks. Glad to see that. Glad to see the social services coordinators at the 4 senior multipurpose centers, because they need those social service coordinators bad. And happy to see the $2 million for the East Point Library funded through the library bond. And then what's left, a lot of these things came from the fact that I had initially requested this spreadsheet from the finance department, which is called the FY 2022 General Fund Operational Request Funded and Unfunded. And I was a little concerned when I saw, well, I was very concerned when I saw many of these items that were not funded on this list. And when I talked to the various justice partners, other elected offices about their needs, they didn't even realize that they had not been funded. And then some things for senior services. But I'm happy to say that a lot of those things have been resolved, and a lot of them are already on this BOC enhancement request sheet under the field that says requests that can be funded with the 7.5 million or mid-year. They're all in here. You have the senior services, alternative senior transportation services increase. You have the operating funds to cover the in-home repairs for seniors, the administrative clerk that's needed in senior services, the ServTrack web hosting software, all of the things that I pulled off of this unfunded list and put on the BOC enhancement request list. I'm so proud and happy to see the county manager and the county executives, Madam COO, who is unfortunately, well, it's good for her and for us. She's moved on to her position at ARC, but she played a significant role in helping to get all of these things done. But so much of what I asked you about from that unfunded list, I see it has been done. And so this lets me know that, you know, based on the unfunded spreadsheet and the things that were requested by those departments, that you had the ability to really look at the overall picture of what was needed and select those things that could be funded through the 7.5 million. And I commend you for that. This is awesome. There's one correction that I see that needs to be made, and what I realize is that when you're pulling from a spreadsheet and trying to paste into another spreadsheet, sometimes it misses the text. And so on line 29, where it says community development, and it says requested funding for Summit for annual CEOs of Tomorrow, it's actually CEOs of Tomorrow and Empowering Young Men to Excel, which are the two youth conferences that I do on an annual basis that include all of the APS and Fulton County schools and nonprofit organizations that deal with youth. And the amount that should be where the question marks is, for those two is the usual 70,000. That's what has been funded in the years past. So if that correction could be made, that's the only thing I see that needs to be correct. I'm questioning though, QLS, I heard and I agree that QLS should be treated as another senior center of ours. They serve our seniors so well. But it's on here, but it has dashes. It has no amount allocated or even, identified for it. So my question on that is, what exactly, why is it on here? What are we doing with that particular entry?
Commissioner, that item was mentioned by Commissioner Arrington at the last meeting, but no dollar amount was actually identified or mentioned. So that's why we put it on the list so that, we can get direction from the board as to how much to fund that item.
Okay, so Commissioner Arrington, he raised it, but there was never any identification of an amount?
Yeah, no, we didn't write any amount down for it. He just mentioned it.
And I'm not sure that we knew what the implications of that are. Is it for us to staff QLS like we would a senior center? Is it to reimburse QLS for their staffing? as if they are, in other words, it was not defined. Now, what we have done, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the amount that's now in there for direct support for QLS, do you remember off the top of your head? 150? Which I don't know if you recall, Commissioner Hall, but that's been a number that I think it had been 50. And then Ms. Richardson asked for an additional 100, and we did it during 2021. And then this was basically, in this budget, was to standardize that as the support level, which I think is what she's been asking for. Now, if you go beyond that, it probably requires a lot more thoughtful effort working with them to determine exactly what model are we talking about and then what funding implication does that bring along. So I'm not sure what, other than we were trying to recognize the commissioner brought it up, what to put in that slot.
Okay, but or should I say, we do already have the $150,000.
Yes, ma'am.
In the budget for QLS.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that just goes to the fact that we do need to discuss this further when we have Commissioner Arrington here at the next BLC meeting. And maybe somebody can touch base with him in the interim before then and get some more information on exactly what he meant when he raised this. And then I see that the food insecurity funding can be taken from the ARPA funds. And so is there a plan for that? I know we discussed it before. Is that Dr. Rochelle?
So, Commissioner Hall, the
Yes.
use case for food insecurity is outlined and includes funding for seniors as well as some other types of food programs. And so that is the reference here.
Thank
I can
you.
get you the specific amount that is available for 2022.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you so much. And so we are moving forward with the creation of the Office of Sustainability for $500,000. I'm glad to see that, that is part of the $7.5 million. And do we have a team that's already working on a plan of how we do that?
Yes, we'll be working with Joe Davis, and his key person, I believe, is Alex Trachtenberg out of DREAM, that we'll be working with on implementing the sustainability projects.
Great, thank you. And so, Mr. Chair, I see the Grammy Museum on here. I'm willing to support the Grammy Museum. I think that it will add a whole nother level of human services and community outreach and economic development and so much more, and bringing our arts community, our creative industries together. So I look forward to seeing that added into this. Yes. Because I think that if we can support our citizens with all of these great human services, that is an addition. That's going to be a great addition to it. Thank you.
Commissioner Ellis?
Oh, Commissioner Khadijah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Abdul Rahman.
Thank you, Chair. County Manager, just because I just got about three inboxes on my cell phone. QLS, we are actually, and I just want to state this for the record, we are actually doing the level support that we regularly did from the previous year. What's on the budget that Commissioner Hall was talking about was an additional ask, correct?
Yes, ma'am. I'm not sure we have an additional ask from QLS.
Yeah.
We've met that ask.
Exactly. That's why, because it was
Yes.
a little confusion. And I said, well, because my phone went off 3 times with the text messages. The ask that you have already in the budget for QLS is in there. It was just an additional ask, not from them, but it was an ask, but you didn't get the amount, but it had nothing to do with the amount that's already allocated. That's what Yeah.
we've met their ask.
Exactly.
And I think Commissioner Arrington, I think that's what deserves more conversation, is what really is he implying by treat them as other senior centers?
Okay,
'Cause That may
gotcha.
be a complete different model than we have today.
Exactly. It was a little confusion.
Yes,
I just
ma'am.
wanted to make sure that we actually just clear that up just for the listening audience. But I do have a question to ask you. With the Grammy Museum, that $3 million ask, is that in this budget, or is that something that we're going to look at down the road?
No, ma'am, that would have to be in this list of items that could be funded.
Okay.
Out of the 7.5 million and additional underruns that will accrue between now and mid-year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Ellis?
Yeah, just a couple of remarks. I go back to this sort of, and I said this, I think, when we've had 2 or 3 other discussions on this budget. I do think, there are, I think, 29 or so items that fall in this bucket of things that could be looked at, or funded with a 7.5 for the mid-year, plus the stuff that you've already noted that we ought to have to weigh in and under consideration. I think the vast majority of these, in terms of from a numerical perspective, are the types of things that really shouldn't be enhancements, but they're things that can be addressed in sort of due course and, natural underruns in a budget. And they shouldn't be necessarily noted as enhancements per se. And I think that's probably part of the reason why you formulated and presented this budget to us originally the way you did. I hope that's the kind of thought that you are going through when you present the budget to us. The other thing I'll say is, I think that there are certainly a lot of sort of hard things on here that are clear in terms of things that we have in that particular category of things that we can weigh out and make some value decisions around that are pretty clear and have been fleshed out. And there are some other things in here which really bear a lot more study before hard dollars are put to. I think including, kind of to what level and to what extent, we might desire to fund something like, the museum. So I think structurally the way that this is presented, it is a great budget, and it's a great way for us to, go into the year knowing what the headwinds that we were facing and some of the unknowns we were facing, and still at the same time, dig into some of these individual things that individual commissioners have brought forward and validate those and likely fund, probably a pretty significant number of these, once we look back and have completed 2022. So, I realize we may not vote on this today, but I'm certainly supportive of the budget as has been recommended and presented us by the county management team.
Commissioner Hall? I'm sorry, Vice Chair Houseman.
You keep confusing us. Let's talk a little bit about the Grammy Museum. I haven't heard anyone say anything negative about the concept of doing it, okay? I think, though, that we still have some outstanding questions about what our level of commitment is, what we're going to get for that level of commitment, who else is going to participate, how it's going to be structured, who's going to own it. There's just a host of questions associated with it, but that doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile project and we shouldn't still talk about it. Since I've been here, we've tried to help with various capital things that are not our property, and there's been legal issues associated with that. Most recently, I recall when we were looking to support the capital campaign and improvements at the Chattahoochee Nature Center, we were advised that we could not do that because we did not, it wasn't our property, it wasn't our facility. Well, it is our property, it's a long-term lease, so they manage the property. So I just want to make sure, County Attorney, that before we go down this path, that our processes, policies allow us to do that, to support a capital project that is not one of our buildings. So I don't need an answer right now, but, we were told that years ago when we were looking to do something at the Nature Center. So I just want to make sure that, we're following all of our processes and policies and procedures. And if it's something that we do want to do, what we would need to do legally to allow that to happen before we make any financial commitments one way or the other.
Vice Chair Hausman, we will prepare a response to that and have that for you so that you can consider that before your next meeting.
Commissioner Hall?
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair Hausman, for that. We definitely need that information. And when Brad Olecki met with me to talk about the Grammy Museum, that's one of the requests that I asked of him, is some details on what are we committing to, and also the fact that we have been the leaders, so how are we being recognized as the leaders of helping the Grammy Museum? But my question that I'm raising now is, like I said, I'm very happy to see the 7% COLA for the employees, but I do have to raise the question about our retirees. Will our retirees be receiving the COLA? I know we have two different retirement systems. We have the old pension and we have the new 401. And so can Mr. Herman, who are you pointing at?
Sorry, that was Hakeem.
Madam CFO?
Yeah,
Was he pointing at you?
Yeah, thank you. The defined benefit retirement plan has a built-in COLA for it, and the board, the retirement board, has already approved that COLA. There is a group of retirees in that plan that are covered under the old defined benefit plan who are not eligible for the automatic COLA. And we do have resources in the budget to cover the same COLA that the other retirees will be receiving. As for defined contribution plan retirees, their benefit is pulled from their personal plan assets. So there is no cost of living type increase that goes into those plans because their benefit pulls directly from the value of their plan.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Just to add to what the CFO said on those, the small group that it's not part of the automatic increase on the DV plan, we'll bring a resolution to the board at some point down the road, based on a recommendation of the defined benefit pension board. And then, I will bring the resolution for a BOC approval.
Thank you. I look forward to that. Thank you so much.
All right. Any other comments today regarding the proposed 2022 budget? Not, let's continue, Madam Clerk.
Continuing on page 5, 22-0018, registration and elections, request approval of qualifying fees for Fulton County offices to be filed by the 2022 primary or nonpartisan election.
All right, motion to approve by Vice Chair Hausman and seconded by Commissioner Morris. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 6 yeas, 0 nays. 22-0019, Human Resources Management, request approval to modify the classification section of the Classification and Compensation Plan.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Hall, seconded by Commissioner Abdul-Rahman. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 6 yeas, 0 nays. On page 6, under Health and Human Services, 22-0020, Public Works, request approval of a resolution expressing Fulton County support and approval of a MOU regarding the funding and collaboration by and between Fulton County, the Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority, the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, Cobb County, Gwinnett, DeKalb, and the Department of Transportation and the Atlanta Regional Commission.
All right, the motion to approve by Vice Chair Houseman, seconded by Commissioner Hall. Commissioner Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is awesome. If I remember correctly from the drawing, these are express lanes that are going to go over the top of 285. Is that correct? In the center? This is great. My only question is, as I read through this, there were no details on what part does Fulton County play. Can someone speak to that?
So as you know, this has been discussed for some period of time.
Yes.
The implementation of bus rapid transit inside the managed lanes that you're referring to. And the role that we would play, I think, would be twofold. Number one, it is a part of our overall transit plan, which spans all of Fulton County, and a very important part. And then secondly, this memorandum of understanding really knits together the interest of multiple jurisdictions, counties specifically, Fulton, DeKalb, Gwinnett, and Cobb, since it spans that entire area. But also there have been mayors and cities along that route that have been participants in this study. So we will then be a part of, by signing this agreement, a part of a policy governance committee set up to advise and counsel. And as you recall, some of the discussions around both South Fulton Parkway and Georgia 400 in the early stages of where would the stations be placed. I would anticipate that will be some robust discussions about where these stations will be placed. And since we have about 5.7 miles of that route, it'll be critically important that we're represented in that policy group to determine that one of those stations for sure is in Fulton County, but also to see the totality of this overall project come to fruition.
Thank you. And you said there are about 5.7 miles of that's in Fulton County?
Yes, ma'am.
Will there be any cost to Fulton County?
So the good news is, not as a part of this study, if you recall when Jeff Parker presented in the last meeting, as a consequence of the board approving the 14th Amendment with MARTA, a part of that penny will fund this study. So there's no incremental cost to Fulton County for this study effort.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Houseman.
Yes, and Commissioner Hall, one of the really exciting parts of this effort is for the first time, Cobb and Gwinnett are agreeing to partner on a transit issue with MARTA. And so hopefully that will lead to those counties joining the system and really providing some regional relief through the transit agency that is all in one effort. So it's a big step, really big step.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for that additional information, Commissioner Vice Chair Houseman.
All right, Commissioner Morris.
I just wanted to point out that the entire stretch of this is in Commission District 3.
All right, anyone else? All right, let's vote, please.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Commissioners, full board appointments. Both appointments are for the South Fulton Community Improvement District Board, 22-021. Commissioner Abdul Rahman has nominated Jim Sams for a full board appointment.
All right, motion to approve by Commissioner Abdul Rahman, seconded by Commissioner Morris. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 6 yeas, 0 nays. 22-022. Commissioner Abdul Rahman has nominated Kent Mason for a full board reappointment.
All right, motion to approve by Commissioner Hall, seconded by Commissioner Morris. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 5 yeas, 0 nays. And we have the add-on item, 22-0028. Request approval of a resolution in observance of the 93rd birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., sponsored by Commissioner Abdul Rahman.
All right, motion to approve by Commissioner Abdul Rahman, seconded by Commissioner Hall. Please vote.
And the vote is open. And the motion passes, 5 yeas, 0 nays. No further items.
All right, no further matters to come before us today, and without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you. Some almost 5 hours later than I thought we'd be here, but when they were saying this morning, well, we're gonna be.
For a written transcript of this meeting, or if you need reasonable accommodations, including this communication in an alternative format due to disability, please contact the Clerk to the Commission's office at 404-612-8232.